Alright, in this video we are going to look at the Beatles Singles Collection. So this box set was released in 2020. It is quite a hefty piece of work here, as it includes 23 7-inch singles, all faithfully reproduced on vinyl. But while these are the UK singles, each of the individual sleeves is a picture sleeve from a different country around the world where the single was released. Here is the hype sheet that would have appeared on the back originally. Then we have our nice perfect bound booklet, which gives a very good detailed history of just the significance of these singles in context of their whole career. We get some of the original single labels that Parlophone would have issued. Very nice booklet. Some of these pictures have been repeated across the sets that we've already looked at, but it doesn't particularly bother me because they're still very nice and they're produced well. And then in the back we have all the individual track credits. One thing to note, in being faithful to the original single releases, almost all of these are in mono and replicate the mono mixes, except for Ballad of John and Yoko, Something, and the A-side of Let It Be, as those singles were only ever mixed in stereo. But the first big batch of these are all in mono. So we have Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You. Now these are actually proper card outer jackets with a paper poly-lined inner bag to protect the record. So these are not just your standard paper bags. These are actually very well protected, and they even have the track names on the spine of each, so you can just pull them out without having to thumb through the covers. We have Please Please Me and Ask Me Why, From Me to You and Thank You Girl. This is She Loves You and I'll Get You. This is I Want to Hold Your Hand and This Boy. This is Can't Buy Me Love and You Can't Do That. The labels on the singles are also replicative of the original country that these came from, but I'm not going to pull all of them out. We have A Hard Day's Night and Things We Said Today. I Feel Fine and She's a Woman. Ticket to Ride and Yes It Is. Help and I'm Down. We Can Work It Out and Day Tripper, double A-side. Paperback Writer and Rain. Yellow Submarine and Eleanor Rigby, another double A-side. And yet another double A-side, Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane. That picture bag actually was released in the UK. It was one of only two. We have All You Need Is Love and Baby You're a Rich Man. Hello, Goodbye, and I Am the Walrus. Lady Madonna and the Inner Light. This is from Japan, and this is quite unusual. A gatefold 7-inch single jacket. I've never seen that before in my life. We have Hey Jude and Revolution, but whatever country this is from mistakenly lists Revolution as the A-side. Get Back and Don't Let Me Down. Ballad of John and Yoko and Old Brown Shoe. Something and Come Together. And then the other UK release that would have been released in a picture bag is this, Let It Be and You Know My Name, Look Up the Number. And then included as a bonus is Free as a Bird with Real Love, so the two tracks that were made from demos from John Lennon in the 90s for the Anthology compilation. So that is the box set. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. I'm Brandon Ware. You're watching Angel65, my channel for all things music related, including music reviews and my own music publications. Today we are on Chapter 4 of the Beatles Deep Dive, where we are looking at the Beatles, the Singles Collection, a massive 7-inch box set containing all 22 of the original UK singles. Now let's get the obvious thing right off the bat. Is this an essential purchase? Of course it's not. Everything on here has been digitally remastered and is available elsewhere. In terms of the music that you're actually getting here, well, it's 23 7-inch singles that each have 2 sides. So you're getting a total of 46 songs, which for the retail price that I paid for this, which was probably around $220, is really, really gouging. That's insane. At the same time, of course, vinyl costs more and is more collectible to produce, but that's the main reason you would buy this, for collectability. It is, however, a beautiful box set, and what I particularly appreciate here is that you get the context of the singles on vinyl the way they were originally meant to be heard, not as part of a compilation, and you can merge this with standard Beatles vinyls so that if you're listening to all of their stuff on vinyl, rather than listen to all of the studio albums and then listen to the compilations of singles after the fact, you can actually splice these in and listen to them in historical context. So if you're listening to Rubber Soul, then you can throw in We Can Work It Out and Day Tripper in there as part of the mix, because that was released on the same exact day. If you're listening to Revolver, you can listen to the Paperback Writer and Rain single, which is contemporaneous with that period, etc., etc. So to hear their progression from single to single, including the ones that were part of albums and the ones that were not, is fascinating. So I thought a good use for this video might be to just quickly talk about each of these and just the context of them and what's going on and how they're progressing. So if we start here at the very beginning with Love Me Do, P.S. I Love You, this is the first version of the track with Ringo on drums, not the version that was included on the Please Please Me album. And this is their first single on Parlophone Records. George Martin wanted the boys to record Mitch Murray's How Do You Do It, which they did, but they shelved it in favor of their own track. And while Love Me Do is certainly not a brilliant song by any stretch of the imagination, this is where it all begins, and that's why it starts both the Red Album and the One compilation, because by choosing to release a double single of their own songs, they immediately established themselves as songwriters, which is, more than anything else in the early days, the key thing that makes the Beatles more important than almost any of their contemporaries, is that people on both sides of the Atlantic were singing other people's songs, whereas the Beatles were singing their own. Of course, they did covers on their albums. The first 2 albums, and then later Beatles for Sale, all have a large amount of covers on them. But really, the Beatles established themselves as hitmakers in their own right, not by copying other people's work. And that is what makes them one of the most significant bands of all time. Because while that's taken for granted now, at the time it was not. It was truly something to behold. Please Please Me and Ask Me Why, often called their first #1, even though in retrospect it technically was not given status as a #1 because it never did reach #1. It only got to #2 in record review, so it's not included on the One album for that reason, even though as far as they were concerned it was a genuine #1 and their first proper hit in their home country. You get Ask Me Why on the B-side. So although the single version is different, all 4 of those tracks are included on Please Please Me. So for collectability reasons, those singles are not as significant, but for historical reasons they're very important. Next we get From Me to You and Thank You Girl. So again, the songs are getting a little bit more adventurous here. Still very much in that Tin Pan Alley, AABA format, but From Me to You is definitely a step forward from both from Please Please Me and Love Me Do. It's got a slightly more harmonic interest in it. Second #1 in a row. And then of course the one that really sealed the deal for them in England was She Loves You, with a really cool song, I'll Get You, on the other side. I'll Get You is a really nice B-side, pretty catchy. In the Past Masters booklet in the stereo box set, they talk about one of the more interesting things about She Loves You was that it was one of the first songs to make effective and intentional use of the word yeah, which now seems like, what? People weren't saying yeah back then? Colloquially, yes, but in songs it was not a very popular thing, so it was quite a thing to behold them using that yeah instead of yes, which is what Paul's father would have suggested, I believe I read in Steve Turner's book, A Hard Day's Right. Fascinating book. You should highly check that out. And then the one that truly changed everything forever is I Want to Hold Your Hand. This was a huge hit in England, and when it came out in America, it topped the charts before the Beatles even came here. This is the one that changed everything, and you listen to it and you just hear the faint echoes of those girls screaming 60 years ago, and just how important that was. 60 years ago, history was made with that single. And we have much of music history has that single to thank for it. After the Beatles, it was commonplace for English bands and bands from all around the world to have huge fan bases in America. The Beatles were the ones that made that happen. Yes, there were some other artists that had success in America that were not from America, but really the Beatles were the first international artists to become bona fide superstars in America. And I Want to Hold Your Hand is the one that made it happen. Music has been changed forever. Is the song itself like the most brilliant song ever written? No, but it is a genius pop song. The middle eight and just the harmonies between John and Paul, I mean, it really is the sound of a generation, and it holds up. I enjoy listening to it. I know how significant it was to people there that were alive then, and how important it was to the music history as a whole. So that's what I think of when I hear it. I'm not thinking of, oh, this is a genius song. I'm thinking of, wow, these guys really made a cultural touchstone with this little 2-minute pop single that, had anyone else recorded it, it might not have done what it did for the Beatles. So it's truly beautiful stuff. And then we get Can't Buy Me Love. So songs are getting a little more adventurous, a little more rock and roll, getting a little edgier, especially on the B-side. You Can't Do That, which is one of John's more edgy songs. Kind of points the way to some of his more jealous lyrics, which we would see later on. What's a good example of that? Run for Your Life on Rubber Soul for sure. Kind of a precursor to that. And then we get the title track. Another key moment for the early days was A Hard Day's Night. The opening chord of that is still one of the most famous song openings in music history. Brilliant opening to a single, to an album, and to a film. On the B-side, we get Paul's Things We Said Today, which is another nice track. Things really start getting adventurous on I Feel Fine. The significance of this single being that it opens with feedback, which is pretty much the first time that had ever been done intentionally. So quite a bizarre opening. And the riff is just killer. I mean, even today, the riff in I Feel Fine is a great guitar riff, and this is a fascinating, wonderful song. This is where I really start to appreciate the songwriting aspect of it and not just the historical context. The B-side, She's a Woman, again, very much in line with things we'd hear later from Paul, that kind of old school blues rocker type stuff. And then we get the one that really, really blows my mind and is, in my opinion, one of their best singles, which is Ticket to Ride. This song is amazing. It is one of the best songs that I've ever heard. Every time I hear it, and I hear Ringo's drum pattern and just how boundary pushing this is. Oh my God, Ticket to Ride is so cool. What a cool song. How many boundaries it pushed. It was their first single to be over 3 minutes. It's got different time signatures in it. The drum groove is one of the most unique and unconventional drum grooves ever. It's just such a brilliant song. And the B-side is equally brilliant. Yes, it is. It's just a beautiful ballad with those lovely 3-part harmonies and a harmonium, which was also used on I Need You, recorded the same day, I believe. Yes, it is. It's a beautiful B-side. And then we get an even more brilliant single, which is Help. Help is one of the greatest pop songs ever written. I absolutely love that song. Every time I hear it, it makes me think how genius these guys were. That they could turn a title like Help into a genius pop song. The second movie is not as good or as important as the first one, but still just a genius title track from John. And later, he said it was his first autobiographical song, and that there's some truth in the lyric about needing help and needing someone to be there for him, which I guess was Yoko Ono. He's said a lot of contradictory things in different interviews, but it's agreed that this was one of his first autobiographical songs. And then we get that, again, roots rocker, I'm Down, Paul singing on the B-side. And again, this is significant. We can work it out, Day Tripper, because it's a double A side. So both sides are the A side. It's 2 hits on one record. Nobody would do that now. At least I don't think they would. And both of them were hits. Both of them hit the top of the charts in England. Only We Can Work It Out hit the top of the charts in America, which I find surprising because Day Tripper is, it's got a very American kind of groove feel to it to me. It sounds almost like it is a precursor to the hippie San Francisco stuff that was going to come 2 years later. So I'm surprised that We Can Work It Out was the bigger hit. That said, though, We Can Work It Out is, again, a genius track. The fact that they were able to condense just these brilliant verses and choruses and bridges with different time signatures into 2 minutes shows that these guys knew how to market themselves. They didn't even, it wasn't just their image. The songs were truly getting much better here. And then we have the one that just maybe changed everything, which is Paperback Writer and Rain. So Paperback Writer is significant for the loudest bass. Of course, beautiful song with 3-part harmonies, but the B-side, Rain. Backwards vocals, psychedelic sounds using the Leslie speaker, the bass sound, the crazy drum groove. Rain is one of the greatest songs the Beatles ever did. It is such a perfect B-side, which is why I was kind of appalled that it was not included on the Red album, even though Paperback Writer was. Rain is just, it's one of my all-time favorites. I still love Rain, and when people, I don't think anybody actually does say this, I think it's more of a joke now, but when people say Ringo is not a good drummer, I'm like, can you play the drum part to Rain? That is one of the most unique and unconventional drum parts ever done, and it is brilliant. It's such a perfect drum part. I mean, even Sean Kinney from Alice in Chains, one of my other favorite bands, mentions that's one of his favorite drum parts. I'm sure I heard him say that somewhere. Just amazing. Then we get another double A side, Submarino Amarillo, Eleanor Rigby. Yellow Submarine, children's song, fun song, starting to use sound effects, so things are getting even more adventurous. And Eleanor Rigby, man, what, talk about adventure on a single. So Yesterday was a single in America and went to #1. Eleanor Rigby, though, is just one of the greatest tracks that the Beatles ever did. It's absolutely genius. The string arrangement, just the dark harmonies. Yeah, I love Eleanor Rigby. And the fact that it was released as a single, and the fact that it's the second track on Revolver. The second track, you come right out of the gate with something that adventurous and different. It's unbelievable. And then, I know I keep saying that these get better and better, and they do. That's why it's fascinating going through them in order. What can you say about Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane? Maybe the single greatest 7-inch record that has ever been made, ever. The A-side is one of their all-time most important tracks. The fact that this was held off the top in the UK by Engelbert Humperdinck, I know they kind of laughed it off at the time, but like, seriously? What is wrong with people? In fact, I almost understand why it didn't go to #1, because the fact that it got to #2 is still mind-blowing. That people really did want to go on this journey with them is mind-blowing. Strawberry Fields Forever has got to be one of the most bizarre things I've ever heard to this day. Of course, the story behind it is there were 2 takes in different keys. John liked them both, and he wanted George Martin to somehow join them together. So by speeding one up, slowing the other down, and splicing them together, you create a song which sounds like it's in the same key, even though it's not. And of course, if you listen, you can hear it. You can hear the vocals are slowed down, and they have different timbres because of the way the tape is done. As a recording, it's just marvelous, as is Penny Lane. All You Need Is Love was recorded on the world's first satellite television link-up, so 5 continents were watching. Different countries had different segments. For the Beatles, for the UK segment, the Beatles are shown recording All You Need Is Love with their friends, including Keith Richards around them, just having quite a party. And it's a very important song for that reason. All You Need Is Love is not necessarily one of my favorite Beatles tracks, but it is beautiful, and it's indicative of that period, the summer of love, if you like. And Baby You're a Rich Man is a really cool, wacky B-side. Hello, Goodbye. Things are just increasingly psychedelic now. Of course, the more significant track on this single is not the A-side, but the B-side, I Am the Walrus, which carries on right where Strawberry Fields left off, with just how bizarre can you get and still write something that sounds like a hit. The recording techniques, the tape loops, and the broadcast sounds and the strings, it's incredible. It's mind-blowing even to this day. There's never been anything like it before or since. After just a series of singles which try to keep pushing boundaries, we go to a single whose A-side is very much back to roots. Lady Madonna, recorded with Fats Domino in mind, Paul said, and Fats Domino did later record this. The B-side is the more interesting track to me, which is The Inner Light. So again, George using that Indian musician stuff. This is the first time George Harrison's on a single, and I really like The Inner Light. I think it's a cool B-side. And then maybe the second best single they ever did after Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane would be Revolution and Hey Jude. Without speaking specifically about the quality of either of the songs, just the way this was pressed was truly revolutionary. So the A-side, Hey Jude, 7 minutes long. The coda goes on for 4 minutes of repetitions. In order to accommodate this and fit it on a 7-inch record, they had to gradually reduce the volume as the song played, which is noticeable as you're listening to it. It gets quieter and quieter, probably for the last 3 minutes of that fade, until it finally fades out all the way. Leave your stereo turned all the way up to accommodate that fade, flip it over, drop the needle on Revolution, and it is the most loud, blaring, in-your-face guitar sound that certainly they had ever used, and maybe many people had ever used up to that point. Certainly other bands had used distortion and stuff. I mean, Satisfaction by the Stones was already out by this point and things like that, but just the fact that the two songs were paired together in that way is fascinating. January 1969, the Beatles are at Twickenham and then Apple Studios to make what eventually became the Let It Be album, but the project was shelved. The only thing that come out of those sessions was Get Back and Don't Let Me Down, which features Billy Preston on the A and B side playing Fender Rhodes piano, and for that reason alone, it's a fascinating single, worth hearing, great single to open 1969 with. Ballad of John and Yoko has never been a favorite song of mine, and no, it's not just because of the subject, although I will admit that doesn't make me like it anymore. I just don't think it's a particularly brilliant song. Recorded with just John and Paul. Paul plays the drums, and I know Paul is a good drummer and is a significant musician and was maybe the biggest genius of all in the Beatles, but I don't think he's as good as Ringo, and I think Ringo may have played a more interesting part on this, but George and Ringo are not on this at all. It's very much a John and Paul thing about John and Yoko, and it's not that I dislike it, it's just never been a favorite of mine. I'm surprised this was a #1 single. The B-side, again we have a George Harrison composition. We got Old Brown Shoe, which is one of my favorite George Harrison tracks. For that reason, I was very pleased that it's on the Blue album, but I was also quite surprised, and that's probably where I got most familiar with it, was on the Blue album, not as the B-side to Ballad of John and Yoko, even though the two tracks are included in sequence, but I just think it's a really fun track, and it's cool. It's indicative of the period and George's growth as a songwriter, as is Something, which is the single best track on all of Abbey Road, or at the very least, it's tied with his other song, Here Comes the Sun, which also would have made a beautiful A-side. This is the only single that the Beatles released in the UK that came out after the album from which its songs were included, Abbey Road. As a result, it only reached #4, though Something and Come Together were listed together and topped the US charts. So both of those are included on the one compilation. Both are also included on the Blue album. Come Together is also, of course, one of their greatest ever songs, and it's fascinating to have those two songs on a single piece of vinyl, of course, with the tracks reversed from how they are on the album, where Come Together is first and Something is second. And then we get the final UK single, Let It Be, which is significantly different than the version that's released on the Let It Be album. It lacks the superfluous and over-the-top Phil Spector overdubs and is much more down-to-earth, also has a different solo than to what's on the record. Great song to end on, maybe the perfect ending single, although The Long and Winding Road was released as a single in the US and did go to #1, so fair enough. The B-side, You Know My Name, Look Up the Number. This was started in 1967 with additional work in 1968. I guess the plan was to release this on the B-side of a Plastic Ono record, so John's side project. That was vetoed. Paul and John finished it. It came out on the back of their very last single. incredibly bizarre song to end on. Incredibly bizarre song regardless. The fact that they would put it out at all blows my mind. It really does sound like something that you would have expected to have been kept in the vaults. Perhaps it was done as a tribute to Brian Jones. I would not sure if he would have been passed away when that single came out. The single came out in April 1970, I think. January 1970 is when the overdubs were done, because Brian Jones did die that year, and fittingly enough, yes, okay, so this is 1970. He would have been dead already, but he did play alto saxophone on that. Sorry, my memory goes when all these events overlap. And then the last inclusion here is Free As A Bird on the A-side, Real Love. So Free As A Bird was made for Anthology 1, Real Love was made for Anthology 2. Both cool tracks. Of the two, I like Free As A Bird better because it almost sounds like a Beatles song. I mean, both of them certainly sound more like completed and really nice Beatles songs than Now and Then, which I thought was, well, I liked hearing it, I thought was a strange way to celebrate the Beatles' legacy that came out last year. I thought that was a very odd idea that they would do that, but regardless, it is what it is. And it's nice to have both of those songs on vinyl because I don't own them on vinyl anywhere else, and I do like Free As A Bird quite a bit. I think it's a really good song. So that's like the context of these singles, and the context is really why you might want to go through these in track order on vinyl. That said, is the box set itself necessary? No, it's a collector's item. So if you're a diehard fan and you want to hear all of these songs in the context they were originally released in and just experience their growth on vinyl and maybe add to the... In my case, it's not nostalgia, but it's almost like me trying to pretend that I was there even though I wasn't. If that's what you're interested in, then this is a great purchase. And if you can get it for less than $200, then it's a worthwhile purchase. But in terms of actual value for money, I mean, it's an absurdly high price for what's about 3 hours of music across 46 sides. So, do I recommend it? As a collector of vinyl, yes. As just a pure collector's item, this is just a beautiful set and is one of my most prized possessions in my entire Beatles collection. I was hoping that something like this would get released for a long time because more so than any other band, the Beatles are the singles are super important to their career. I tend not to be a big fan of 7-inch vinyl. I tend not to care about it too much. I usually go for LPs instead, but the singles are so important and so many of them are not on the main albums that I really think it's beautiful that they did this set so that you can intersperse these with the albums on vinyl and hear all the singles in context. And if you just listen to these in order, which I did yesterday, you get an appreciation for how much the Beatles grew from single to single in just a little over 7 years. So it's brilliant stuff if you're this kind of collector and want to own something that really is beautifully packaged and sounds fantastic. All of the singles are pressed well and sound amazing to me. Let me know your comments, your thoughts on that box set and just the singles career of the Beatles in general down below. Hope this one gets some traction because the singles are really important and I want to hear what other people have to say about them and what other people think of that box set. Maybe some of you own some original pressings of these singles, and I'd love to hear if you have the box set and those, what is the comparison like? How is the sound quality different, better, etc.? All right, that's all for now. Have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.